Joe Cook. Joe is a geological technician for Energy Corporation of America, where he has worked for nearly 14 years. He's a past member of the International Oil Scouts of America and past treasurer and secretary of the Appalachian Geological Society, where he currently serves as vice president. He's also a member of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists and serves as the convention logistics coordinator in preparation for the eastern section of AAPG conference that'll be held in Morgantown in September this year. So, thank you. Joe, it's all yours.
I'd like to start off by thanking Mark and Harold for inviting me out. First time here at Range, and I have to say the offices are really, really nice. Just fantastic looking offices. One thing we talked about a little bit earlier, Joe touched on, was the industry, the situation with where we are in the industry and how things are progressing. So that's kind of where we're going to talk about a little bit. May the 31st of this year, Drilling Info, which is, what, 3 or 4 days ago? Drilling Info said that there was 975 land-based rigs that were active in the U.S. Of those, 489 of those rigs were actually drilling in Texas. And of those rigs, 338 were drilling in the Permian Basin. So I had to ask myself, I know you were waiting for the slide to go, not ready yet. I saw you guys kind of shift your eyes over there. Like, where's the slide at? We're not there yet. So anyway, what we have is 50% of all rigs that are drilling right now in the U.S. are drilling in Texas. And of those rigs, 70% of those are drilling in the Permian Basin. I had to ask myself, if so much is relying on, our industry is relying on the Permian Basin, shouldn't I know a little bit about it? I mean, I know a whole lot about the Appalachian Basin, but I don't know a whole lot about the Permian Basin. So this talk really has come out of what I've learned along the way on that. So there's a few things that I want to touch on. The first thing I want to touch on is our connection to the Permian Basin and its beginnings and their recent history. I originally planned to talk about some of the geological background, and if you guys would like to actually read some of that, I posted this on LinkedIn, and this is where Mark actually saw that, and it would take me too long to go through all the geological processes, so I kind of dropped that from the talk. But there's 3 topics, 3 keys, if you will, that I want to kind of communicate. First of all, the Appalachian oil and gas professional has a significant connection to the Permian Basin, and one that we can be really proud of. Number 2, I wanted to give you a look outside your own basin. I don't know if you guys work in oil and gas, you always see the Marcellus, you always see the Utica, and you just see it day in and day out, and you get kind of tired, and after a while it gets kind of stale. But if you get a chance to look outside your basin, sometimes you learn things from what other people are doing, and you're able to apply it to the basin you're in. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of that. And finally, I hope to bring you up to speed on the recovery in general, and especially for this extremely important geographical area for oil and gas. So, legacy. Legacy is one of those things I think about every once in a while. Now, when I think about legacy, I think about my children, but you know, legacy really doesn't just talk about our children or the people we'll leave behind. Sometimes it's what we've done in life that other people will reach and see years and years after we're gone. That picture was taken a very long time ago, so I apologize for being out of focus. you. The Permanent University Fund, or the PUF, was established by the 1876 Constitution of the state of Texas. And it was established to fund higher education. Initially, the lands that they put in the Permanent University Fund was about, the acreage it was around the University of Texas that was close to the railroads that was there. And it was about 1/10. Basically, the idea was that they could lease those lands out, and usually for grazing, and they could take that money and use it to fund the various needs of the university. Not part of the initial offering was an additional 1 million acres that the land that Texas gave the Texas Pacific Railroad, but the Texas Pacific decided that it was just too worthless to survey. So they decided that they just didn't want to deal with it, and they gave it back to the state of Texas. In 1883, that was added back into to be part of the PUF. Now, in the beginning, they had various livestock that they would bring out, but later on, there would be something else that they would decide to make a whole lot more money on. So this house right here is a house that a young lad about 7 years old, at the same time when this document's being penned in Texas. And he probably played in the backyard and probably got in trouble like all 7-year-old kids. And his name was Michael. Have anyone here heard the name Michael Benedum? Wow, you guys are going to love this story then. Okay, so anyway, Michael was about 7 years old when he lived in this house. And he lived in Bridgeport, West Virginia. And he could have no clue of what that document being written in Texas at the same time that he was 7 years old would do to connect him to the state of Texas and to the University of Texas and so much more. So this is Michael's family as he got older. He had married his sweetheart Sarah Nancy Lance. She actually attended college not too far from here in Waynesburg. At Waynesburg, when it was Waynesburg College, not university, in Greene County. And they settled in Cameron, West Virginia. And they had their only son. His name would be Claude Worthington. He was born in 1898. Well, as Claude got a little bit older, the whole world was at war. It was right around 1917, April 6th, I believe, that the U.S. decided to declare war on Germany, and they joined in. Now, can you imagine if your child is drafted into the service and has to go off to war, how you would feel? And especially if you're thinking about your legacy, and you only have one child. So this is Michael Benedum's only one child, and you put yourself in his situation and you're worried. And so could you imagine how great they felt when they found out, hey, he's only going to Washington, D.C. He's going to join the chemical warfare group. He's going to Washington, D.C. Not only is he not leaving the U.S., but he's going to be close to home. He's just a few hours down the road. Everything's going to be okay. But the fierce fighting in France was only the one thing that you had to fear while you were in France. There was a second wave of the Spanish flu pandemic that was sweeping through France at the time. A terrible place to be. And while the war never made its way to the shores of the U.S., the Spanish flu pandemic did. On October 17, 1918, Claude Worthington would be one of 91 lives lost in a 24-hour period of time to the Spanish flu pandemic. Estimates of lives lost in World War I was about 19 million. The lives lost that was estimated for the Spanish flu on the order of 40 million. If Michael and Sarah Benedum thought that they had lost their legacy whenever Claude passed away, they wouldn't have been alone, but they would have been understandably incorrect. A few years later, on May 23, 1923, the Santa Rita No. 1 struck oil on PUF lands in Reagan County, Texas. Shortly afterwards, oil fever began to spread. Best, like many towns that grew out of fast money, would be corrupted by growing violence and vice. Residents of Best called upon the Texas Rangers to come out and to fix everything, right? And the best way that they knew how to fix things was they burned down all the brothels and they burned down all the saloons and made a mess of the town. And it was very, very difficult back then, I guess, to get good law and good control. But anyway, the town of Best had a rocky start, hardly living up to its name. About 3.5 miles down the road was another town called Texon, and it couldn't have been more different. After Santa Rita number one drilled and hit oil, they drilled a bunch more holes, and it ended up that they were all dry. So that's when Benedum enters our story. Benedum acquired the Santa Rita number one, which incidentally is considered to be the first well drilled in the Permian Basin. It's not correct, but it's considered to be the first one. The Santa Rita number one, he purchased that with a 10,000-acre lease and began exploring, and he opened up a company called the Big Lake Oil Company. It wouldn't be easy. Several dry holes later, the Big Lake Oil Company finally hit oil with with well number 9 flowing at 70 barrels an hour. But Michael wanted to make his family, his life for his workers really well. So he started building his workers houses. He wanted them to work close to where he wanted them to live close to where they worked, and most of all, he wanted to have an environment that was devoted to family. So as the Big Lake Oil Company prospered, the picture you saw before was 1925. This is 1926. This is 1 year later. As the Big Lake Oil Company prospered, so did Texon. And Texon became a model town with stores, a union church, good housing, a school system, and a hospital. Entertainment facilities included a movie theater, swimming pool, playground, baseball park, golf course, and they had 738 residents, and the public school boasted an enrollment of 50 students. The PUF became the largest endowment of any higher learning institution in the United States, riding on the back of the money raised for Big Lake Oil Company. It was decided to give the University of Texas 2/3 of the money for their endowment, and Texas A&M received 1/3. Benedum, however, did not forget where he came from. He was known throughout Pittsburgh as a man who made other people millionaires. He was responsible for having a civic center and a Methodist church built in his hometown of Bridgeport, West Virginia. Michael and Sarah decided, sorry, I just got a good luck for my boss at work. Michael and Sarah decided to establish a foundation in their son's name, and thus the Clyde Worthington Benedum Foundation was born. The foundation has authorized grants totaling $410 million. The grant is focused on West Virginia and southern Pennsylvania. So whether you look at the town of Texon, created in the heart of Reagan County, built to provide a family atmosphere for his employees, the Clyde Worthington Foundation, reaching countless people in Appalachia, or universities of Pittsburgh, Texas, Texas A&M, or West Virginia, you can see the lasting legacy of Michael Benedum, and as beautiful as the Performing Arts Center in the midst of his beloved Pittsburgh that bears his name. Now, the Santa Rita number one and Michael Benedum kind of put the Permian Basin on the map, and they are our connection to the Permian Basin. But let's look at what's happened since then. I looked at this over a 5-year period of time. And I wanted to look at this because many times people think of permitting as a barometer of how companies feel about a certain geographical area. Over the last 5 years, there's been 2,129 wells permitted in Reagan County, Texas alone. As it says up there, there's 1,401 that were permitted to be drilled horizontally and 728 were permitted to be drilled vertically. The Apache Corporation led all vertical permits with 161 wells. FIML was acquired by Discovery Natural Resources, so their combined total made 121 wells. Laredo rounds out the top three with 106 wells. However, Laredo completely dominated all companies when they permitted horizontally with 245 wells. Enduring Resources permitted 190, and Pioneer Resources 156. While Reagan County's permits were wonderful, in the middle of all this permitting came the downturn. And of course, I don't have to explain that to you, we were all part of that, right? But in the middle of all this, people started reevaluating the way that they looked at their property. And the way that they would evaluate it is through production. During the last 5 years I looked at, they had actually produced, this one county produced 121 million barrels of oil, 460 million MCF of casehead gas alone. From 2012 to 2015, they actually increased year over year 7 million barrels of oil year over year. Now, Joe touched on this a little bit, but many company officials are quick to point out that the increases in production are due largely to better pre-drill well planning, new drilling technologies such as rotary steerable rigs, new generation completion designs, and production optimization techniques that keep the formation from being damaged. Laredo was one of a handful of companies that embraced the new technologies to increase production of oil over a 5-year period of time, and it looks like it worked because they produced 25 million barrels. Pioneer was behind them with 21 million. American Energy became Permian Resources, so combined they had 15 million, Apache 13, and Parsley 8. The 5 companies are responsible for 82 million barrels of oil by themselves, and they weren't alone. But 5 companies, 82 million barrels of oil is just amazing. Obviously, production only tells part of the story. When you're looking at a recovery, you can only truly realize a recovery whenever new hydrocarbon starts to be produced. As you know, there was a lot of talk last year about ducts. Are we going to be able to complete all these ducts? And if we do complete them, will we have the capacity in order to pass that on to the people who will be using the product, right? So as I started looking at the completion rate, when I did the LinkedIn article that I wrote initially, I found out in Q4 of 2016 that they had only completed 6 wells in the whole quarter. 6 wells. Didn't sound very good for a recovery, did it? But in Q1 of 2017, whatever the bottleneck was, it loosened up because they actually completed 106 wells. And it appears that the same cast of characters that was involved early on in the development of the county is still involved. Permian Resources led all completions with 21, Laredo Petroleum had 16, Parsley with 9, EP Energy and Pioneer with 8 each. I do want to take time to point out the names of the wells in the southern part of the county near the Big Lake area. Notice that many of their names start with university. That is because they're still part of the university system and still producing wealth for the Permanent University Fund. At the end of the summer last year, There was much speculation over whether this would be a rigless recovery. Well, spoiler alert, we already know that, right? We're starting to get more rigs back all the time. But, in fairness, we wanted to look at the drilling as well. And so we began to look at that. We see that currently, as of May the 31st, a few days ago, there was 16 rigs active. Parsley Energy led the way with 5 rigs. Laredo and Oxy both have 2 rigs each, and 7 other companies have 1 rig each. Interesting enough, only a couple of the rigs are actually drilling the Wolfcamp formation. You guys have heard of the Wolfcamp formation. It's all over the news right now. Everyone's drilling the Wolfcamp formation. But in this county, only 2 of the rigs were drilling the Wolfcamp formation. The rest of them were drilling in the Strawberry formation, which would have made Abner Strawberry smile, because that's part of his legacy. But that's a story for another time. Questions?
How did, was it Benedict, was that his name? How did he get informed of and find out and get connected to, and purchase that?
How did he find out about it?
I mean, he's in West Virginia, that's in West Texas. How did that connection happen?
He had been, to go back a little far, he was actually, as a young man, he was on a train one day. He was going out to get a job. And he was standing there, and there was an elderly gentleman that was standing there. And he said, "Sir, would you like my seat?" And the guy sat down. Turns out that guy was in charge of an oil and gas company. And he offered him a job, and he became a landman for that gentleman. That's how he got into the business. And he was still a young man at that point. Made a fortune up in Illinois. He actually has drilled wells all over the place, but right before he went to Texas, after the passing of his son, he went down to Louisiana and was involved in a purchase down there. And after he sold that off, he sold it for about $7 million. And so he had some cash rolling around in his pockets, and he had some desire to go find something else. So whenever the Santa Rita #1, it became national news. And so that's what drew him out there. By the way, there's a great book that's called The Great Wildcatter. It's by Sam Millison, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it is online on Google Books. And I believe that you can download that. I think it's for free, but even if it's a few dollars, it would be well worth your read. And to be honest with you, when I was looking at all of this, I actually came across Sam's name first, and I traced it all back, and I found out about Michael Benedict, and I was like, I went to tell the people I work with, and they said, "Yeah, we know who he is. You don't know who he is?" So I was quite embarrassed, to be very honest with you. But anyway. Yeah.
At the University of Texas, they have what they call like the J.J. Pickle Core Library. Are you familiar with it? And B, do you know if that is also part of the deal that core samples would be donated to the university?
I don't know that. I don't know that. I know that Michael is part of the museum that's out in West Texas, but I don't know of anything at the campus. And I've been to the campus several times. I actually lived in Texas for a while, so I share that with him anyway, that I'm from here, or from West Virginia, and I lived in Texas for a number of years. But I have never seen his name on anything on the campus.
Okay.
I'm an A&Mer, I'm from Texas A&M, and I don't think there's anything at A&M with his name on it either.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we all
Well, there you go.
get it from the University of Finance.
Do you know why 2/3 went to UT and only 1/3 went to A&M?
Well, originally it was all supposed to go to Texas.
Okay.
I don't know why it was set up originally for it all to go to University of Texas, but when so much money came in, I think that they looked at that and they said,
A little
we've
too
got another
unfair.
university that needs to be funded here. And it really was supposed to be for higher learning, so they needed to really make a decision on if they were going to give all of that money University of Texas. Anyone else? Thank you, guys.